My near-death experience took place on an airplane. The airplane didn't crash, but all of the oxygen went out of the cabin. And so the gas masks or the oxygen masks fell down from those cabinets in the ceiling. And I was traveling with, at that time, this was about over 20 years ago in 2000, I was traveling with 2 younger children and just an infant, like a 4-month-old infant. And so there was so much terror because you don't always, when the gas masks fall down, you would think that there will be one for everyone. But when you're traveling with an infant in your arms, there may not be a gas mask for that extra person. So the panic really started up pretty big. And I was able to get a gas mask, or an oxygen mask, excuse me, from the seat in front of me, which for some reason was empty. I put that on the infant. But what happened at that moment was we were forced to make an emergency landing. There wasn't any oxygen in the cabin. And I had not really been a very spiritual person at that time. I was a Catholic. I was very mainstream as a mother, and like I was a soccer team coach, and just very, very mainstream. And so what happened really surprised me, and I didn't understand until later how an NDE or an NDE-like experience, which is sort of more what I think I've had, can change and alter the entire course of your life. And in my case, we had the gas mask or the oxygen mask on, and suddenly, as I thought we were surely, going to crash or die, or the oxygen would suffocate us all, the entire cabin filled with a golden light. And I had the sense that angels were holding the plane up. And this was unique to me because I didn't really think along those terms at that point. I just had this enormous sense that God was there. And again, that wasn't a term I would have used or even thought of. And then I had this very, very interesting experience where, they talk about your life flashing before you, but it doesn't necessarily, at least in my experience, it didn't necessarily flash as a slideshow of my life. It's almost like I experienced my entire life again, all at once, in the course of a few seconds. And what this showed me, this first start of this opening or this awareness or this change, was how amazing every aspect I had of my life had been, even the horrible parts, right? So we eventually were able to make an emergency landing. Eventually, we didn't have to use the masks. We were okay. But that incident, that near-death experience of thinking like not only was I going to die, but my children were going to die, and there was really nothing that could be changed or shifted, and then it was. I did not come out of the plane the same person. What I noticed, and here's what I think is interesting, is sometimes people will have NDEs like in a hospital where they'll actually, their heart will stop beating for a while, or they'll be in an operation and they'll see themselves lifting off from their body. And I didn't have that experience, but the changes that happened afterwards, again, it changed the entire course of my life and also the entire way I understood reality. When I got off the plane, I was instantly psychic and spiritually awake. And I don't know at what point that happened. This idea of I saw God, or I saw consciousness, or I was consciousness in that moment. I don't know when the change happened, but suddenly I was reborn into a new being at at the moment that from the rest of my life on. And I would say, this was actually pretty terrible, because you get off the plane, everyone's like, what happened? and you're a completely different person. So that requires that much of the life you had previously has to go away or be let go of, or will just release on its own, which is what happened.
So you also mentioned being instantly psychic, so like from one moment to the other. How does that work, and did it at any point freak you out? Because it sounds like it wasn't gradual at all.
Yeah, I mean, I had always been incredibly in tune intuitively, and even as a medium as a child, but it was always kind of simmering in the background. It wasn't something that was allowed in my family or discussed. And when I got off the plane, you hear that expression, it's like you show up, you're not wearing any skin. It's just like I was so open. I could just look at a person and read them, or I could understand how a situation was going to be, or I could connect with spirit. Everything just opened. And I actually believe now that this is our true reality, that we're absolutely open all the time, but society tells us we're not, and for some reason we believe that. But it was a big problem, actually. I've sometimes talked about the time after, where it was the dark night of the soul for a lot of, maybe 4 years. I didn't fit into my old life. I had all these new awarenesses and all this new understanding, and nobody that I knew at that time understood what I was talking about. Just like, what happened to her? She's lost it. And this was back in 2000, so this was not a time when, like nowadays, NDEs or psychic abilities or channeling or these other things are in the mainstream, but back then they were not. So it was quite a journey of just hanging on to this new reality and getting used to that this was how it was going to be from then on. Yeah.
And tell me about the dark night of the soul. Like, how did you navigate through that? Because I hear very often from people that have had NDEs that all of a sudden, indeed, their life does not fit anymore, right? You go back to a life that doesn't seem to resonate anymore. And there's so many pieces where we think, well, this is just it, right? This is the job that I have, this is the partner that I have, this is the life I've built. It's incredibly difficult to think, well, I need to start everything from zero, and even if I would, where would I even start from? What would I do? Mm-hmm. So walk me through how this process was for you.
Yeah, so interesting thinking back. Well, some of the other things that happened right after this experience, one of the big things was that my father died just maybe a month or so later. And so those experiences, the NDE experience and then the death of my father, were really, really closely timed. And so that sort of expanded it or made it more, because I was dealing with his death. He had a long illness. I was dealing with his death from the perspective of infinite soul, as opposed to, or from the perspective of mediumship, as opposed to where I had been just a few months earlier, the idea of loss and grief, and you'll never see that person again. And I had an incredibly spiritual experience in his passing. I was there in the moments shortly before he died. So that was actually a tremendous gift that came actually from having the NDE experience, having this awakening, and then having this death sort of partner right up with that timing. After that, you could say it was the grief. You could say it was even some kind of depression. I don't really think that's what it was. I just remember for 4 years kind of wandering around lost, this not fitting in. And I was raising actually 4 children at that time, and just feeling so confused. Like, what do you do when you're raising 4 children and you realize like none of your experience is working? And I have heard, I know Pema Chodron, the Buddhist monk. She was a mother, and I can't remember her story exactly, but she had the same experience of needing to walk away from that role or that identity in order to fulfill her mission or task. And I also believe Byron Katie, the author, who's pretty well known, she had this similar, like, the mother role no longer fit, the mainstream role no longer fit. And yet here you have these, anyone who's a parent or mother knows, like, you have these massive nonstop duties that you can't just shirk. It's your responsibility. So for 4 years, it was kind of like, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? And eventually I got divorced and just started over. It was pretty hard. It was pretty rough, but that was what needed to happen based on the new understanding. Yeah.
And for anybody that's navigating, feeling the way that you were feeling during that time, so just feeling very lost, not quite sure what's not right. And as you said, if you're a parent, those duties do not stop. So you have to keep going, as well as figure out what it is that you're missing and what it is that you need. Would you have any advice for anybody that is navigating and feeling lost as you were?
I think it's really important to find helper people that are just going to show up to assist you in your new understanding. And it's important to allow them into your life and allow them to sort of show you some new ways of thinking about things. I met shortly after, and these weren't that significant on their own, but when you add them up, they created this sort of safety net for. I met a person who was a hypnotherapist, and he took me through some hypnotherapy. I was actually just helping him practice. It was just a friend, but in the journeying in hypnotherapy, I discovered I can journey like mad, like I'm an excellent journeyer. And so that experience kind of unlocked a key of like, well, how am I going to deal with this? Oh, I can journey, I can meditate. I didn't know that before. That was very, in the mainstream. I also found a therapist who did EMDR or EF. And that really released the trauma of the experience. Almost the first time, you do this eye movement, desensitization, and the first time it just shifted it. It was like the whole trauma of the experience was gone. It didn't change the awakening trauma, I guess, or gift. I'm not sure which you'd call it, but the trauma of the plane experience just dropped out. And then other people, I met some really creative artists, people who were dealing with some sort of spiritual themes, and just like I wasn't really seeking because I didn't know who to go to, especially where I lived. It was very conservative. But these interesting people just started showing up. And I think for a person who's facing this, like, trust the universe is going to bring you helpers, potentially in really weird, strange packages that you don't expect, and just allow them to assist you. Just begin to accept the gifts that are coming your way.
I love that.
Yeah.
Because very often I think the universe just gives us what we want and what we need, right? Or what we need in order to get to the next step on our path. But so often we don't see those signs.
Yeah.
Because they come in the form of people, they come in the form of challenges, of opportunities, and it's still up to us to lean into those.
Yeah, I I think sometimes the universe must feel not frustrated, but it's continually helping us, and we're like, I need help, and then we're like, we just sent you 70 helps. Why didn't you take any of them? Because you were on your phone. What? like you just distracted and don't notice it, or you think it has to come in a certain way, which it doesn't. It can come lots of ways. Yeah.
So, because of your experience with the plane and thinking that you're going to crash and you're going to die, I'm wondering, have you flown after that, and what's your relationship with flying on planes now?
Do you know lorazepam? It's anti-anxiety. It's no. It was really hard. It was really hard, and I actually don't use any drugs or any alcohol, but I do when I'm flying. I'll take something to just kind of zone out. But so there's that. But also I decided, or I really have begun to trust, like when it's it should have been my time to go back in 2000, but it wasn't. And so this idea, when it's our time, it's our time. And we don't need to worry about that because we're not in charge of that. I suppose if you're doing, really, really extreme, dangerous sports, or then you're sort of gambling a bit with what your time is or not. But in general, we don't have any control. And there's a great relief in knowing that it's beyond our ability to. We are not in charge of the universe, and that's a great relief, actually.
And that's so true. And I also wanted to talk to you more about mediumship, because you mentioned you were instantly psychic after this incident, but you also said that you sort of had connections with that when you were a child. So what was that like? And was it also something that was accepted in your family and by your parents? Was it encouraged, or was it seen as like, no, you must have been dreaming, those things don't happen?
Well, it wasn't accepted by the family at all, and it was in fact sort of restricted or said it wasn't real. I mentioned to you earlier, I lived in Norway, and I lived in Oslo, and where we lived as a child, I was pretty young. We lived right next to a pretty big cemetery of some kind. And so as a child, for some reason, I was allowed to just go into the cemetery as my playground, right? Or just go, you could just go walk around. And I did that. And as a child, it was like a party in the cemetery. It was like filled with people, filled with spirit people. And so I was there daily, sort of with my spirit buddies or whoever was there. And, the first few times I would come home and say, oh, there were these people there. After that, I just stopped telling what I was experiencing. But I never had any unfriendly, I've almost never had any unfriendly spirit activity in my life. So either, I'm not sure why that is, but that was there. And then after the NDE, it really kind of shifted. So, there's so many psychic abilities. Mediumship is one of them. Healing might be, and energy healing might be another one. But for me, the things that started to open up more than as a child, where I began to have clairvoyance, where I can see visions or journey and do visioning, shamanic style journeying or meditative journeying. And that was very big. I would just know how things were going to happen. And the biggest thing for me that opened, it was channeling and writing, where I began to channel spiritual teachings in writing. And that didn't start, 2000 was the NDE. Around 2004, I started channeling and writing. And that is where I think like my biggest contribution to maybe spiritual understanding comes through the channel and that messages I've channeled over those last years. So I think that would be probably the biggest gift that opened, or the biggest new thing that opened up as part of the awakening.
And a lot of people come to you, I'm guessing, to be in touch with loved ones that are no longer here. What are some of the common themes or questions that you usually get?
Yeah, actually for me, I don't really offer that as something that I do anymore. I think I think that's an excellent question, and I'll just speak to what I used to do. I don't do that now, but often what will happen is when you are in touch with your spirit guides, they're often come in position sort of around you so that it's really easy to understand who's standing where. And for me, I'm not the person who sees an apparition necessarily when I'm with a person that's wanting to have touch with their departed beloved, but often, so my guides will be behind me or to the side of me, and then I will be able to see their guides in some positions behind them. And then there's usually a place, for me it's usually to my right, behind them, where the departed will start to show up. And the departed, as they work with me, are very, if your grandmother was a farmer, she's going to come in her farming outfit so that I can know, like, there's a lady farmer here, and then they'll be like, that's my grandma. Or they'll come with specific objects, like a special necklace or something that's really known to the person. So they're really working to communicate visually or through their actions so that you can't miss the message. And it's interesting because sometimes the departed will be people that are really known to the person, and sometimes they'll be more ancestral, like the person won't even know, or maybe met them when they were a baby. And even those ancestors will come forward saying, look, we're paying attention, or we're here. I did have quite a few really strange experiences with apparition form right after the NDE. Now I'm remembering, I was at the swimming pool with a bunch of kids, and I looked over and I saw this man I sort of vaguely knew in a suit or in business dress standing at the pool, and I just thought, that's so weird. I didn't know he came here, and why is he in a suit? That's just seemed strange. And then we left, and then we discovered later he had just passed. So he was doing some kind of showing up to see the places that he'd been before. I have had many incidents where I can look at a person and just know, like, they're not here long. And that could be young person, old person. I usually wouldn't say anything to them, obviously, but it's just, there's this sort of knowing, like they're not fully here for some reason. They're already in another realm.
Are there signs? Because, sorry.
That's okay.
If you can see that, then I'm thinking, way before we pass on, there must be some signs or preparations, if you will. So do you know if there's anything like when you have, I don't know, a couple of months or so to live, that is there something happening that actually gives you the vision of, oh, this person is not going to be here long?
Yeah, I see it just as their energy is not on the earth plane. But I think if you're the person who's going to pass, I think it really varies depending on your awareness level. I think, like a lot of, say, Buddhists might be able to determine and know the day or the hour of their death. They just are so in tune, they know that that's what it is. There's a lot of people, especially in the US, but actually everywhere, who are really not very aware at all. And so I think they're not aware of anything, let alone their own, their own, like, am I on the earth plane? Am I heading to the departed plane? They don't even know they're on the earth plane. They're just not aware.
Yeah, I can imagine. And that actually brings me to a question that I've been wondering for so long, and I think you might be able to address it. So my grandma, when she was really sick and close to her death, she really wanted to go. She was in pain, as I think a lot of people that are hospitalized at the end of their lives are. She knew that things weren't going to get any better, as, again, many people in that situation know. So she was praying constantly to go, and she was asking me to pray as well with her, which I did, because I also thought that that would be best for her. My question is, do you have any kind of influence when you say, oh, please God, just take me, like, I'm so done, like, please just do that? Does that matter in any way at all?
I think it matters if you are aligned with what the universe has planned already. That's again that question, like, we're not in charge. And you don't really know for your grandmother if at the very last moment she had some understanding that if she had gone earlier, she wouldn't have been able to have. You don't know. Or if there was some reason that she needed time to think about, whatever she needed to review. It's really interesting though, because on the other side of that is, when we're born, like, when do we're probably in another realm deciding we're going to come in, and like, I wonder if we get to choose when the moment we enter into our lives. I don't know. The other thing I want to add is, I believe we're not only living in this dimension, so say your grandmother may have been living in multiple parallel realities, just as we all do, I think. And maybe there was unfinished business in another dimension that she needed to take care of, or maybe something needed to be prepared for her if she were going to reincarnate a certain way. Obviously, I don't have the handbook on this, so I don't know. And nobody knows, anyone who tells you they don't know either. So I just don't know.
Yeah, no, but it's so interesting, I think, to talk about these things, because I think generally people are just so limited in what they believe and how they see it. And I think by trying to understand a bit more and deepening our knowledge spiritually and about what can happen on the other side, I think it allows us a broader perspective of what life is, first of all.
Yeah. I was watching this silly movie, it was a comedy recently, and in the movie, I don't remember what it's called, but they believe in that the earth is flat, and they also believe that the earth is held up on the back of like an elephant and a turtle or something like that. And we laugh about that, but honestly our beliefs now in terms of religion or science, we're going to laugh about that too very soon. We do not understand how it is. We just don't.
Exactly. Yeah, I also always think of it just like the flat earth, like at one point that was just common knowledge, and you would have been considered insane for even suggesting that it could be round, right? Because then people would just fall off. And now we just laugh at this, but then there's so many things that we don't know. And I always say it, especially when we have people with very strong views in the comments, I'll say, well, how do you know that that's the truth? Like, if you're so keen to argue that this isn't true or that another reality is true, like, how do you know for sure? How do you have that certainty?
Right.
Because we rarely do, and I think we need to be a bit more humble in our beliefs. Like, we can learn, we can believe, we can think, And we can be pretty damn sure, but 100%, that's quite tough.
I think when all of this happened for me, all this opening, one thing that was pretty weird is that, like, nowadays there's so many books on, psychic awakening, channeling, NDEs. There probably were books then, but it's like almost like I was blocked from any resource. It was like it was hidden from me, and my only way of learning was meditating and journeying. And I didn't work with a teacher or a system or a practice. I just experimented. And I actually think that's the best way we can all understand what we believe, is by trying different things and seeing what happens. Going into, and by journey, I don't mean like an ayahuasca journey or a psilocybin journey. I just mean going into meditation and traveling deeply with your guides or whatever beings are going to show up to reveal things to you. Like what is in there when we explore? It's so fascinating to me. And what I've been receiving most recently is this continuous idea from the guides about we're just particulate. They don't even say cells, or they just say it's all the particulate is conscious, the consciousness agrees to create form, and all of these other ideas that you have are really don't matter, because that's all it is just a bunch of consciousness making agreement to present this reality. And this is not just matter, but time and space. It's all dimensions all at once. So how do we put a handle on that? Like when we're trying to make our coffee, I don't know, but sometimes having the bigger idea leads us on the path to shifting the mundane in our lives.
So you mentioned parallel realities or parallel lives earlier on. And that's a concept that I have to say I don't fully grasp. Also because I think of time, I think in a very standard, simple way of thinking of it. As in, we're in the present, there's the past and there's the future. How do you think of parallel lives, and how do you see it? And what does that mean for the time that we're experiencing?
Well, I have not seen that movie. It's Everything Happens All at Once. But I do think that title is exactly the way that I think of things. I don't think of time in a very standard way anymore. I think once we get more capable, we'll be almost able to bend time or extend it or shorten it. Like we'll be able to work with it as an energy field. Also, I don't know how to do this, but I have had experiences where, like time stops, or you just suddenly, you only have 3 minutes, but suddenly you have all the time you need. And I think that when you start to journey and go, it almost, so sometimes I work with the idea that we're in this one particular river of flow, that's our lives, that we experience. Right next to that, there's another river and another river. There's infinite rivers. And we're on all of these rivers all at once, experiencing different outcomes. Like maybe in this one, you and I are talking. In the next river over, you're talking to me yesterday. In the next river over, we never spoke. In the next river over, we're asking different questions. In the next river over, our past lives are talking to each other, who we were. In the next river over, our future lives are talking. So I think consciousness doesn't have any limits on it. It doesn't chop up into matter and time and space. So it's just, oneness all at once. And again, it's a big idea, but we do have to live in the world that we've all agreed upon, which has all these rules about time or what have you.
I love that. And it will take me a minute to wrap my head around it, but I love your explanation of it.
Yeah. Well, just think also, like even before COVID, we didn't really even have Zoom. I mean, we had Zoom, but it wasn't really an understood concept. What we're actually doing is a kind of visual telepathy with Zoom. Right now we're using this computer or phone or whatever we're using, but in several years we won't need that to connect. We'll be able to just bring in the visualization in third eye and be in telepathy that way. It's not here yet, but these tools of our phones and other things are teaching us how to have telepathy with each other over distance. Eventually we won't need the tools the same way. We're not there yet, but it will happen, I believe.
But do you think technology, if I understand you correctly, is helping us develop our skills as well, so we reach that point?
Yes, I think so. I think probably we couldn't, I mean, just think the old phones had to have wires and, wire lines. Then we had the mobile, then we had, so with every step we're getting more and more free, that we just accept this idea that we can talk over time and space. We didn't know we could do that 30 years ago, or I don't know when. The phone was like a big deal when it came, or we didn't have the idea that we could have cars. It's just like the technology changes it, and then our understanding changes it.
Right, so then you think technology will find a way to enhance that, and not so much it will be within ourselves?
I think that we will learn to do everything without technology over time. Even things like, when you are reading an article or watching a video and then there's the comments below. So that's interesting because the comments are now giving us almost like the view of the collective. It may not be the whole collective, but we didn't have that level of interaction or feedback with other souls all at once. And that's just like, if you want to know the pulse of what people are thinking, at some level you can just start reading a bunch of comments on everything and see, like, what are most people thinking? It's very interesting. It's new. That's a new thing. Not always welcome. I might add to the people that I have to block, but that's just what it is. Yeah.
That's true. And I have to say, I do love it, because that's the feedback, right? Like, this is how you learn. And I read for my own benefit, or sometimes stress at night, but I read each and every comment. And I think it's definitely more helpful, because then you get a global idea of what the audience in this case, or the collective, the community actually wants and expects. So yeah, I think it's amazing that we can give our own 2 cents on everything. I do think not everybody should have a right to.
Yeah, you want to be contributing, not tearing down, if possible.
I'm not sure who said that, but there was a podcaster, I think, that said there should be a 10 push-up rule before you write a hateful comment.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I don't know what that's about. But, we're seeing everyone suffering, right? That's the other thing that comes out, is like, look at the suffering, look at the anger, the rage. This is also what people are feeling. And so this shows us like the pulse of how people are doing. Not that great a lot of times. Yeah.
So tell me more about how this spiritual awakening has led you to the path of doing what you do today.
Well, I think that spiritual awakening made me see, or helped me to see, everything from the lens of the soul, not the lens of, I call it as one word, like the mind, ego, personality. Not that I don't have, problems with my ego, just like everyone, or problems with my personality, but it really kept saying, like, the soul is the most important. Consciousness is all that matters. The mind, ego, personality is very temporary and easily swayed. The body is never going to lie to you, but it's a limited, finite being. And so this continued focus on what is the soul answer here, or what is the bigger answer here, or what is the infinite answer? And I don't know, you just go from this smaller view to this really expanded view on everything. Like, yeah, just even the small things, like, does it really matter what a person's moral code is? Like, maybe, but maybe not. Does it matter how people behave? I'm not sure it's for ours to judge. Like, and it's not the same as spiritual bypassing, which is a very common idea now. We don't just say, everything is horrible here in my life, I'm just going to go work with my guides or ask the angels. That is not what it is at all. It's really saying there's all this suffering in the world, and what are the bigger answers? And then we start to look at ourselves as connected, conscious beings, infinite beings, attempting to evolve as a whole, as opposed to just little personalities running around.
That's an unbelievable mission that you're on.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I'm not the only one, right? Like, there's there's so many people attempting to sort of lift up humanity, like lots of different ways. I mean, doctors might be doing it, artists might be doing it, dancers, musicians, regular people doing regular stuff. I mean, we all have our unique way of contributing to lifting up suffering, transcending suffering.
For sure. So tell me, how can people find you and your work?
I am in Portland, Oregon. So for those who are in Europe or other places, I'm on the west coast of the US. And you can go to sarawiseman.com. I do a channeled forecast every month, which is pretty interesting. And then I also have lots and lots of low-cost courses for anyone who wants to learn spiritual intuition.
That's amazing. And your monthly, did you say monthly forecast?
Mm-hmm.
Is it about the state of the world or what you perceive as happening?
I channel from the guides, and it's about, they call it the quality of time as we're experiencing it now, like what to pay attention to now. It's not astrological, it's just through channeling. And especially in the US now, like we're heading toward election at the time of this recording in a few months. So I haven't channeled that yet, but I'm very curious as to what, if any guidance there will be on that. Or maybe it doesn't matter as much as we think. You know, we're all very focused on this marker here, and maybe it's not important. I'm not sure yet. I have to wait for further information from the guides and see.
Yeah, I'm really curious because, right, like we tend to think like when we have elections or something like this or like COVID, we think, well, it's the biggest deal ever. It's a huge, massive deal. I don't want to sound like one of the candidates, but like you would think, oh, that's like so important, right? But I'm always curious if in the grand scheme of things, it actually makes a difference. If say the other worldly beings would also see it like this.
Yeah, I would think that it doesn't make a difference. I would think that I want people to vote, but I would think that we really can't control how things are in the world, and everything that is happened is agreed upon by the collective at some level. And so it's just like where we are in terms of our evolution and understanding, that's where the reality will be. We're creating this in agreement with each other, even if we don't like how it is sort of what the collective is saying. Yeah, in 200 years, today won't matter that much, or This is why our infinite nature is so important. It gives us the bigger picture.